I live in Georgia. Me and 3 friends had been talking for a while about taking a trip somewhere outside the US because none of us had really traveled before, except Florida vacations growing up. One of my friends, Sam, had an uncle who retired in Panama years ago and apparently owned some property out there with a house people stayed in sometimes, like family friends using it whenever. I didn't want to go because money was tight for me and I hate flying. I've always hated flying. I know everybody says statistically it's safer and all that, but it just feels wrong being trapped in a metal tube for hours. But eventually they convinced me because Sam kept saying this was probably the cheapest international trip we'd ever get to take. So I saved up for a couple months and went. We stayed near Panama City at first in a pretty crowded area near bars and restaurants and tourist stuff. Lots of traffic, loud music at night, humid air constantly. I liked it more than I thought I would. Everybody there seemed relaxed all the time. We mostly just drank, walked around, ate food, and acted stupid like guys in their 20s do when they finally get away from work for a week. Sam's uncle had this second property farther away from the city, somewhere up in a more rural area. I couldn't tell you exactly where because Sam was the one navigating most of the time, and I wasn't paying attention. I remember the roads getting narrower, less pavement, less people. At one point I remember thinking how weird it was seeing houses randomly tucked way back in heavy trees where you couldn't even really see them from the road unless you looked hard. The drive itself took forever because it had rained earlier and some roads were muddy as hell. We stopped at this tiny roadside place to buy drinks and snacks. And I remember there were stray dogs laying under the tables outside because it was cooler underneath them. The house wasn't creepy when we first got there. It was a 1-story place with a metal roof, wraparound porch, screened windows, old outdoor furniture that looked sun-faded. There were trees everywhere around it though. Dense trees. Not the kind where you can see through them very far. It's like layers and layers of green. At night the sounds out there were insane. I don't even know what half the noises were. The first night I barely slept because everything outside sounded alive all the time. Back home nights get quiet eventually. There it never really did. We spent like 2 days there just grilling food, drinking beer, swimming in this muddy little river nearby, and screwing around. One afternoon, we drove into a small town for groceries, and Sam's uncle knew half the people somehow. The night it happened, everybody else was inside playing cards and drinking. I remember losing money because I'm terrible at cards, and Sam kept accusing me of pretending not to know the rules even though I genuinely didn't. We had music playing, and the power kept flickering every once in a while because apparently storms out there messed with electricity a lot. At some point my phone finally got enough signal to send texts. Service around that property was terrible. You'd randomly get 1 bar in certain spots outside and then lose it again. I wanted to call my sister because she'd been worried about the trip and I hadn't talked to her in a couple days. So I stepped outside with my phone looking for signal. Everything smelled wet, dirt and plants basically. I wandered around the side of the house checking my phone like an idiot, holding it up sometimes because somehow everybody thinks that helps signal. I eventually got 1 bar near this clearing off to the left side of the property. Not really a clearing actually. It's like less trees packed together. I had just started hearing my sister's phone ringing when something hit my left leg. That's the only way I can explain it. It felt exactly like getting snapped hard with a rubber band mixed with a sting. I yelped out loud and almost dropped my phone. I remember grabbing my thigh thinking some giant insect bit me because there were huge bugs everywhere there. Something was moving right above me, branches shifting. I looked up expecting an animal. What I saw was the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life, even to this day. There was something pale sitting up in the trees like feet away from me, above head level. The moonlight was catching it weird through the branches, so for a second my brain couldn't understand the shape I was looking at. I thought it was a kid immediately though, or at least child-sized. It was staring right at me. I remember opening my mouth to say something because my first thought was literally, how the hell did this kid get up there? I realized I could tell the shape was all wrong. The left side of its body, or maybe right side from where I was standing, just wasn't there properly. It was missing. Part of me thought branches were covering parts of the body. It shifted slightly, and I realized no, there was only one arm gripping the tree. No legs hanging down, no second arm. I know how insane this is, trust me. That's exactly why it scared me so bad, because my brain couldn't make it make sense. It looked almost tucked into the tree, pale. I couldn't tell if it was hairless or if the lighting made it look that way. The face looked thin, strange, too still, and it never blinked. They always ask me if it was a sick kid or somebody injured, but no normal person sits like that up in a tree at night, completely silent, staring at strangers. Also, I swear to God there were no legs, none, nothing hanging from the body. I heard this sound from it, like somebody tapping their teeth together softly. I almost slipped in mud. My phone fell somewhere near the grass, and I didn't even stop to grab it. I ran straight back toward the house, yelling for Sam. I remember slamming into the porch railing because I hit it sideways trying to get up the steps fast. I couldn't even explain it. Sam thought I got mugged. Once I got inside under lights with other people around, part of me started questioning what I saw. But my legs still hurt. I pulled my shorts up, and there was this long red mark across my thigh, almost like something sharp grazed me sideways. The three of us went back outside while our other friends stayed inside near the door, yelling for us not to be idiots. We walked back toward where I'd been standing, and I found my phone in the grass with the flashlight. Nothing was there. Nothing moving in the trees. The branches up there were thinner than I realized before, like way too thin to hold even a small person's weight. Sam even pointed that out while shining his flashlight around. He said if somebody climbed up there, they would have snapped branches everywhere. I didn't tell him right then about the missing limbs part. I waited until we got back inside because I was scared. When I finally explained exactly what I saw, everybody went quiet. Austin thought I saw some kind of animal with mange. Sam said maybe a monkey missing limbs from traps, but neither explanation matched what I saw at all. I know what a monkey looks like. This had a human face. By morning, I already knew I wanted to leave. Something about that thing completely broke my ability to relax there. Everybody else kept acting like maybe I just freaked myself out in the dark, but even Sam admitted I seemed genuinely terrified, and he'd known me since middle school. I'm not really the dramatic type normally. They wanted to keep the vacation going another few days, while I wanted to head back immediately. Sam kept saying we already paid for everything, and maybe I saw some injured person hiding out there. I ended up telling them I was serious about leaving. I was actually weirdly calm by then, because once I get scared enough, I stop acting emotional and just kind of shut down. Sam could tell I wasn't joking anymore, so he stopped arguing about it. He said he'd drive me back toward the city so I could catch an earlier flight home if I really wanted. Austin still thought the whole thing was some local kid messing with tourists. The drive back took hours. Longer than before because it rained again halfway through and the roads turned into complete mud in some areas. At one point we passed this tiny little roadside cemetery. I only remember because there were bright fake flowers everywhere and little painted crosses crowded together near the road. Sam slowed down because chickens were crossing right through the middle of everything. There was an older man standing near the cemetery entrance, smoking. He watched our truck go by the entire time, not in a threatening way. I remember turning around to keep looking at him through the back window. Then Sam suddenly asked me something weird. He goes, "When you saw it, are you sure it was looking at you?" I told him yes, obviously. He finally admitted his uncle had mentioned stuff in the woods near that property. I will not be sharing that due to some dark reasons. I asked him why he didn't mention any of that before. He said because his uncle says crazy stuff all the time. Apparently the uncle drank a lot and believed in all kinds of weird local stories. Sam didn't really take it seriously. I remember sitting there in that gas station parking lot, sweating through my shirt despite the rain, cooling everything down. There were these mountains way off in the distance, hidden partly in fog, and for some reason the whole place suddenly started feeling very far away from normal life. Hard to explain, like realizing you're somewhere you don't understand at all, and everybody around you has grown up with things you haven't. I caught a flight out the next morning, earliest one I could afford. I was living out of my car for a while back in 2019, a little over 6 months total if I'm remembering right. Everybody instantly gets weird about it and assumes you were either on drugs or completely falling apart, but I was just broke and kind of stuck between things. I had lost my apartment after hours got cut where I worked, and at the same time my roommate moved in with his girlfriend, so everything sort of collapsed at once. I was still working though. I did work for a small storage property outside of town in Oregon, closer toward the coast side. A lot of rain, a lot of trees. I had this old Toyota Camry that survived way longer than it should have. I'd work till around 5, sometimes later if somebody moved out of a unit and left junk behind. Then I'd shower at a cheap gym membership place in town before trying to figure out where I was sleeping that night. You start learning little routines living like that. Which grocery stores don't care if your car sits there too long, which gas stations have bathrooms open late, which parking lots security checks and which ones they don't. I got decent at it eventually. Most nights I stayed near bigger areas because it felt safer. But every once in a while I'd get tired of noise and headlights and random people knocking on windows asking for cigarettes or money. So sometimes I'd drive out somewhere quiet. That night was one of those nights. My shift had sucked because one of the storage units had flooded from heavy rain earlier that week, and this older guy screamed at me like I personally caused the weather. After work, I drove around for a while with no real destination. I ended up getting coffee from a place attached to a gas station and just kept driving north on this smaller highway surrounded by trees. There was this wooded park area I knew about from before everything went bad financially, like a day-use recreation area with trails and picnic tables. Families went there during summer. Fishing nearby too, I think. At night, it was dead empty because technically you weren't supposed to stay overnight. There weren't gates though. At least not then. I pulled in around 9:30 or 10. The parking area wasn't huge, enough room for 15 or 20 cars, and it curved slightly around these tall trees, so parts of it disappeared into darkness fast once you got away from the entrance. There was one old bathroom building there with concrete walls covered in graffiti. I remember hearing water somewhere nearby. I reclined my seat back and watched stuff on my phone for a while to waste time before sleeping. I used to do that every night because otherwise you just sit there thinking too much. Around 11, something moved past the windshield, a person cutting through the parking lot. It immediately felt strange because she was moving fast, like somebody trying not to panic. It was a young woman. She had dark hair and a light gray hoodie on, and she kept looking behind herself while walking. She crossed in front of my car. I don't think she noticed me at first because my windows were fogged some and I had the interior lights off. She looked terrified. Looked like somebody trying to stay calm while something bad was happening. She stopped near the trail entrance for a second and looked back toward the parking lot entrance again. I was thinking maybe somebody was chasing her. I almost rolled the window down and asked if she was okay. But when you live in your car, you become careful about involving yourself in things. Something felt wrong enough that I sat up fully instead of trying to sleep. She disappeared into the woods. Then another person showed up. This time it was an older woman. She came from the opposite side of the parking lot near the bathrooms. I have no idea where she came from because I hadn't seen another vehicle arrive. She was walking slower than the younger woman had, but she kept scanning around like she was searching. She wore this long, dark coat that looked expensive compared to everybody around that area usually. Clean and expensive looking. Her hair was blonde or gray. She spotted my car eventually and walked over enough that I got nervous she was going to knock on the window. Instead, she stopped like 10 feet away. She asked if I had seen a girl come through there. I cracked the window because at that point, pretending asleep would have been weird. I remember her voice sounding calm, but forced calm, like when people are angry but trying to hide it. I said, "Yeah, she just went toward the trail a few minutes ago." The woman nodded really quick and said, "My daughter got upset and ran off." I don't know why, but immediately I didn't believe her. It wasn't even one specific thing, just the whole feeling of it. The younger woman looked scared in a completely different way than somebody arguing with family. Also, the age gap felt odd. I asked if she wanted me to call somebody because the whole thing felt uncomfortable. She instantly said no. Then she smiled at me for 1 second, and it didn't look real at all. I know that sounds weird because how do you even explain a fake smile? But it was like watching somebody remember they were supposed to appear normal. She thanked me, then walked toward the trail entrance. I watched her disappear into the trees too. Maybe it actually was just a family argument and I was turning it into something creepy because I was alone in the dark. But I couldn't settle down after that. I moved from the reclined seat to sitting upright, watching the trail entrance through the windshield. About an hour later, headlights pulled into the parking lot. Modern, expensive-looking ones. They swept across the trees and lit up the entire parking area for a second before stopping like 4 spaces away from me. It was a black SUV, newer model, expensive. I notice cars a lot because when you live in one, you weirdly become aware of everybody else's vehicles too. This thing looked wildly out of place there. Clean, polished, probably worth more than everything I owned combined. The engine stayed running for a minute before 3 people got out. One was the older woman. The second was a guy around 30. The third guy was bigger. He stayed near the SUV at first, while the other 2 argued quietly beside the passenger side door. I could hear the tone, angry. The older woman sounded stressed now instead of calm. At one point, she pointed toward the woods, and the younger woman wasn't with them. I lowered myself farther in the seat, hoping they wouldn't pay attention to my car. My windows were fogged enough that I thought they couldn't see me clearly. But the bigger guy looked directly toward me. I still remember that. The way he stopped moving. He said something to the others and then started walking toward my car. I acted asleep instantly, leaned my head sideways against the seat, and closed my eyes while trying to breathe normally. The footsteps got closer across the gravel. They stopped right outside my driver's side window. I could hear somebody breathing. He stood beside my car for probably 10 seconds. The whole situation just felt wrong in a way that's hard to explain now. I heard him tap lightly on the glass. I didn't react. A few seconds later, the footsteps moved away again. I waited until I heard the SUV doors shut before opening my eyes slightly. All 3 of them were walking toward the trail entrance now. The older woman first, then the 2 men behind her with flashlights. Nobody looked back toward my car. I should have left immediately, I know that now. But I sat there another minute frozen, trying to decide if I was overreacting or not. Because once you call police on something and it turns out to be nothing, suddenly you're the homeless guy sleeping illegally in a park, explaining yourself to cops at 1 a.m. I kept staring toward the woods, trying to see flashlight beams through the trees. Every once in a while I'd catch quick movement deeper in there, little flashes of light weaving between trunks, then darkness. Nobody was talking anymore. At least not loud enough to hear from where I was parked. After another minute I decided I was leaving. I sat up slowly and put the key in the ignition, trying not to make too much noise. My car was old though, and the engine always made this awful rough sound when it started cold. The second the engine turned over, flashlight beams immediately swung through the woods. One beam moved fast, straight toward the parking lot. Then another one joined it. I remember my heart going absolutely insane at that point because it felt obvious they knew I was there now and knew I was leaving. I saw one of the men emerge from the trail, the taller one. He came out of the woods fast and shined the flashlight directly at my windshield. I couldn't see his face because the light was blinding me, but I could see his outline. He lifted one hand up like he wanted me to stop. I kept driving. He started yelling, then saw the older woman come out behind him onto the trail entrance. She looked angry now, and there was still no sign of the younger woman. There were barely any cars out there that time of night. Everything in my head was screaming that something really bad was going on. The younger woman, she looked desperate. That's the word. To this day, I don't know what happened. I moved back in with my dad in late 2021 after my apartment lease ended. I'm Haley, and I was broke. I was doing stuff for a company, and the pay was just okay. It was one of those jobs where you sit at a laptop all day, answering tickets, and people yell at you over things you can't even fix yourself. I could technically work from anywhere, though, and my dad had been asking me for a while if I wanted to stay with him for a bit and save money. He lived in West Virginia, isolated compared to where I had been living before. The house, my grandparents bought it back in the 80s, and my dad ended up keeping it after they passed away. My apartment before that was near a busy intersection, and there were constantly people outside yelling or motorcycles going by at like 2 a.m. At my dad's place, the loudest thing at night was usually bugs or coyotes way off in the woods. My dad worked for the county highway department and left really early every morning. He'd make coffee loud as hell in the kitchen and wake me up accidentally half the time because the walls carried sound really bad in that house. Usually I'd hear his boots on the floor and his truck starting outside before the sun was even fully up. Then I'd get up around 8:30 or 9 and start work. My setup was in this little spare room near the back of the house. It used to be my grandparents' sewing room years ago. There was still this weird faded square in the carpet where a table must have sat for decades. The internet sucked. Rain would knock it out sometimes, and there were days I had to hotspot my phone just to finish shifts. Most days were extremely boring. My dad usually got home around 4:30. There were little things, but I didn't think about them much at the time because when you live in a rural area, random stuff happens constantly. People wander around drunk sometimes. Hunters accidentally cross property lines. Weird neighbors show up trying to sell scrap metal or ask if you've seen their dog. A few weeks after I moved in, I noticed tire tracks, sometimes near the edge of the property by the woods. My dad said people occasionally use the dirt road to turn around if they got lost, because GPS sucked out there. That area had a lot of people with drug problems too. Not trying to stereotype rural towns, but it was true there. My dad knew multiple people who'd had sheds broken into for tools or gas siphoned from vehicles, so random things weren't unheard of. I never felt actually scared there until that guy showed up. My dad was at work, obviously, and I was on my lunch break. I had taken my laptop outside onto the porch because the house felt stuffy. I was sitting there eating leftovers straight out of a plastic container, watching birds near the tree line. Real exciting life. Anyway, I saw someone walking up the dirt road. I didn't recognize him. Something about him looked dirty but not homeless, like somebody who slept in their truck a lot. It was weird he was walking because there really wasn't anything around there worth walking to. He came into the yard like he already knew the place. It was strange. I stood up automatically because it caught me off guard, and he smiled when he saw me. He asked if my dad was home, then stood there looking at me. His eyes kept moving around weirdly, like he was distracted by other thoughts or listening to something. He asked me if I wanted to hang out with him. It was so random. That was literally how he said it. Not introducing himself first. Not explaining why he was there. It sounded so bizarre coming from some random older guy standing in our yard. I said no thanks, thinking he'd realize how weird he sounded and leave. But he kept talking. He said he lived nearby, said he saw me outside before. I remember feeling my stomach kind of drop because I realized he'd probably been watching the house at some point without me noticing. I told him again that I was busy working and started backing toward the front door. He didn't get angry, but his expression changed. He muttered something under his breath I couldn't hear. Then he asked if he could come inside for water. I said no. There was this awkward silence after that where he just stared at me. His face looked empty all of a sudden, like he stopped pretending to act normal. Then he smiled again and said, "All right." He walked back down toward the road slowly, hands in his pockets the whole time. I watched him until he disappeared past the trees because something about him felt completely wrong by then, like mentally off. I locked the door after he left, but mostly because the interaction rattled me. I texted my dad too. I still remember the exact message because afterward I kept rereading it thinking I should have done more. I said some weird guy just came up here asking for you and acting creepy, lol. That lull still bothers me. Like I knew I was uncomfortable, but I was trying to downplay it even to myself. My dad replied later saying to keep the doors locked and call him if the guy came back. He also asked what he looked like. I described him the best I could. I finished work stuff for another hour or so. Around 2:30 I got up to make coffee because I was exhausted. I barely slept the night before because coyotes had been going crazy somewhere behind the house. I was standing in the kitchen waiting for the microwave to beep. A strange sound came from outside, like someone messing with the front doorknob. Then I heard the door open, and the second that happened, I knew somehow it was him. I think I forgot to fully deadbolt the door. That realization hit me at almost the exact same time I heard footsteps inside the house. I grabbed my phone off the counter and backed into the hallway. I could hear him moving around near the living room area. I heard him talking to himself, like muttering, like a conversation. I couldn't make out most of it except a few random words. It made absolutely no sense. I backed into my bedroom and locked the door as quietly as I could. Then I called 911. The dispatcher answered, and I immediately started whispering because I didn't know where he was in the house. I told her a man broke in and I was hiding in a bedroom. I was trying to listen to where he was moving while answering her questions. I heard footsteps coming down the hallway toward me, like he knew where I was. I remember the dispatcher asking me if I could hear him still inside the house, and I couldn't even answer right away because the footsteps stopped directly outside my bedroom door. I remember staring at the doorknob, waiting for it to move. Then he started talking again. Still not directly to me. He was muttering, like he was saying multiple things at once under his breath. I could hear little pieces, but not enough to fully understand. It sounded like somebody talking in their sleep. The dispatcher was telling me officers were on the way and asking if I could barricade the door. I pushed this little dresser thing in front of it. My bedroom was tiny too, so there really wasn't anywhere to hide. Just bed, dresser, lamp, closet. I remember thinking how stupid it was that I'd locked myself into the smallest room in the house. The doorknob started shaking. He was testing it. After a few seconds, he hit the door hard enough to rattle the frame, like slamming his shoulder into it. He slammed into the door again harder. I remember yelling, "Please leave." He started shouting stuff I honestly can't fully remember now because my brain was completely overloaded at that point. I remember hearing, "Open the damn door," and something about me being rude to him. Then he kicked the door so hard the dresser moved. The bedroom door was old solid wood though, heavy, probably original to the house. The frame shook every time he hit it, but it held. I've never felt fear like that before, where your brain kind of disconnects from reality a little. Then he stopped again. I heard him walking away down the hallway. I heard drawers opening again in the kitchen, cabinets slamming, like he was searching for something or pretending to. I still don't know. A minute later, I heard the front door shut. I stayed frozen on the floor because I thought he might still be outside the bedroom waiting for me to come out. Eventually, I heard sirens somewhere farther down the road. The front door had mud smeared near the bottom from his boots. My dad got there, looking more scared than I've ever seen him in my life. They weren't sure if the guy ran into the woods nearby. There was this whole period of confusion where nobody really knew where he went. One weird thing I forgot earlier was the guy never actually stole anything. That bothered the deputies too because the whole thing clearly wasn't a burglary. A neighbor farther down the road eventually told police they'd seen a dark-colored car parked partially hidden near an abandoned logging trail earlier that afternoon. Apparently, it looked like someone intentionally backed it into the brush so it wouldn't be obvious from the road. Police ended up finding it a mile away. The registration came back to some guy with a long record already. It confirmed this wasn't random weird behavior where somebody was confused or mentally off and wandered into the wrong house accidentally. He saw me there alone and made a decision. That's what scares me. During that time, deputies kept updating my dad occasionally because they still hadn't found the guy. Apparently, he disappeared after abandoning the car. They searched around nearby towns and talked to people who knew him, but nobody seemed sure where he went.